on Friday, we were talking about the various statements the defendant made to law enforcement, and that each time she was interviewed, rather than trying to assist them and provide information, she lied. We talked about this on Friday, and one of the things that Detective Parshall repeatedly asked every time she called into the LAPD was whether or not she had replaced the security system. She indicated she was still waiting for the insurance money, and again, all of these are recorded, and Detective Parshall said it was the first thing that she should do, but you heard she never did. And then we talked about the day after her call in to Detective Parshall, the next night, March 9th, when, as you guys saw, the SIS surveillance crew was following the defendant and Baker, and they followed them that night to the Goodnight Bar and the Laugh Factory Comedy Club. And this is one of the nights where Bella tried to get her mother to come home because she was afraid of being home alone. And of course, we hear the response from Jessica and the, again, text message back from Isabella talking about how she's always home alone, there's never anybody there. She's afraid about being in the house alone, and it's worse when she's alone. It's very clear from the evidence that we heard that she was in distress and fearful. But again, what we learned was that the defendant only cared about herself. And so we also saw the text message where Isabella made the comment that she's going to make a therapy appointment the next day. And then, of course, what we saw is the defendant's attempt to try to make her youngest daughter, Isabella, feel guilty. And you can see that she was successful based on Isabella's response. And then, of course, Jessica saying, you know, Mom, don't feel bad, because she believes her mom is grieving and wants her to be out and be able to enjoy herself, but this has become obviously a nightly thing. So again, another manipulation in this case by the defendant, in this case of her daughters, who she was also using to lie for her to people, and she, as we saw, lied to them day after day after day and left them alone to try and recover from this tragedy that was their father's murder. Again, another call, this time on March 16th. Detective Parshall calls the defendant. He mentions to her during this phone call that he's been talking to this burglary crew, which we know was really the detectives from Robbery Homicide Division, wanting to meet with her. And once again, we see the defendant is asking about the DNA results because she's trying to stay a step ahead of law enforcement, and so that she can also report back to Baker, as we talked about last week. Once again, she lies to Detective Parshall and tells them that it's only the children who are beneficiaries of the life insurance policy, and also claims that she's unaware of the fact that Fabio had stock by saying maybe he had some stock. So again, more evidence of the fact that she's lying to law enforcement because she doesn't want them to believe that she has skin in the game or that she has a financial motive here. And then, of course, you heard from Melanie Garibay, Melanie being the show director at Wella, and you saw and heard that the defendant lied to Melanie Garibay by claiming that Fabio knew she was planning this trip with her girlfriends to Las Vegas, and she's using Melanie for her business connections so that she can get a deal in Las Vegas. And so Melanie testified about the first and second round of text messages that she got from the defendant. And here's the first round where she reaches out and she's asking Melanie if she can get her a deal. They have a phone conversation, as you heard from Melanie, and then Melanie proceeds to text her and say, we got you in a suite at the Vidara and a discounted rate. And here you see at the bottom the defendant is asking what's the rate, and we know the rate wound up being $99 a night for the suite that she and Robert Baker shared when they went to Vegas the first time. And then you heard from Ron Ray, who came in from Las Vegas, who was a longtime friend of Robert Baker. And he first meets the defendant in March through Robert Baker. They come to his home, the home he shares with his wife, Michelle. They go out for lunch, and during the time they spent together, not once did the defendant mention that she had been previously married. She never mentions Fabio. She never mentions during the lunch or at their home that she has children. She doesn't mention the fact that she's a widow. And we talked about the fact that there's this odd moment where he's trying to input her contact information into his cell phone, and the defendant and Robert Baker say, just put down Monica Baker. And you heard the defendant acted like she had a lot of money. She asked Ron Ray, who is in the stock market, about how she could invest in the market. She talked about selling an expensive piece of property in the LA area. That would be the house on Queen Victoria. And then she knew Michelle was a real estate agent, so she was asking Michelle about buying another piece of property in the Las Vegas area for Baker, and that they were going to come and go from that property and travel. He also introduced the photographs that you see here, where they all go out to some expensive dinner that night at a restaurant called Andrea's. Again, where the defendant orders an expensive bottle of wine for herself, paid for everybody's dinner, and then again began this crude talk about her sex life with Baker, how great he was in bed, and Ron talked about how she kept grabbing Robert Baker's crotch, which normally you might think he was exaggerating, except that you saw the same behavior photographed. Then they all go out, as you heard, to a nightclub in one of the casinos, and as Ron said, the defendant acted like she was a 22-year-old on spring break. You remember he was describing her behavior as she acted like she was humping Robert Baker up on the stage with the DJ and some of the other despicable conduct. Now, on that same night where the defendant is out partying with Baker, with Ron and his wife, Michelle, she takes the time to post again to Instagram. And this is a post that takes place, she does it at 8:06 p.m. And she, as you can see here, is continuing to play her role as the heartbroken widow who lost her best friend. Because, of course, she can't be honest about the fact that she's out partying in Las Vegas with her lover, because that sort of scandalous behavior would destroy what she's trying to create, and that is the perception that she's the victim, so she can engender sympathy and get a lot of people to fall all over themselves to want to help her. So that's the same night. Later on that month, the defendant calls Detective Parshall again on March 30th, and now she's talking about the life insurance again. She says she wants to drop off some paperwork for him to sign, and they have a conversation about the car keys from the Porsche, and she tells them that they were always kept in the drawer, in the kitchen drawer. And we talked last week about that placard number 12 in the kitchen counter where there was a drip of blood belonging to Baker just below the monitor. Again, once the defendant returns from Las Vegas, later that same night that she has this conversation with Detective Parshall, we now see that Jessica is texting her mother, "When are you coming home?" And you see that we basically have a role reversal. We have the 18-year-old who's acting as the parent, trying to figure out where her mother is and what time she'll be home, because as Jessica testified, after the murder, she frequently didn't know where her mother was at all hours of the night. And then that same conversation goes on. On the following night, you heard March 31st, the defendant slept over at Robert Baker's, but told her daughter she was sleeping at Sheila's, which you'll be able to see again from that text exchange between them. Then you heard from Gail Burlingame, someone who is unconnected really to the defendant or Fabio, but she was a salesperson, as you recall, at the Ford dealership in Thousand Oaks, and she was completely manipulated by the defendant at first, if you recall. When she came in, she said that she was taken by the fact that the defendant seemed to be so grief-stricken, whose husband was brutally murdered, and now she had no money. And the defendant told Miss Burlingame that she didn't even have enough money to pay her bills. She was desperate for money, and she was waiting for the life insurance money on her husband's life to come in so that she could support herself and her daughters. And so you heard from Gail Burlingame, if you recall, that while the defendant was at the dealership, she made several calls to what the defendant said was her attorney. And it was obvious to Gail at some point that it wasn't an attorney because the defendant was whispering and it didn't sound like a legal discussion to her. The next time Gail reached out to her, after reaching out to corporate headquarters and trying to assist the defendant in being able to turn in Fabio's Ford F-150 because she felt so bad for the defendant, she testified that the defendant seemed much happier, and the defendant reported that she had just gotten the payout from the life insurance money and that she needed a new car. Now, we know that's false, but that was the story she gave to Gail Burlingame. And you heard that Gail tried to talk her into keeping Fabio's car because the defendant had said that she and the girls really wanted to keep the car because it made them feel this connection to him. And so Gail went to all these lengths to work out some kind of a deal where they could do that. And now the defendant is basically telling Gail that she wants a new car. And so you heard the defendant returned to the dealership on April 3rd of 2017. And when Gail asked the defendant what her budget was, the defendant said she didn't know. And you heard that during this 5 to 6 long hour interaction between Gail and the defendant kept leveling up to more and more expensive vehicles. The defendant wanted a convertible, but the issue was she wanted black rims, which were so important to her. And when they finally drove the Mustang that the defendant ultimately leased, the defendant made the comment to Gail that she felt like they were Thelma and Louise. So the defendant eventually decided that day on the black Mustang that you see here. The defendant told Gail that she felt happy again because she could start her new life now that she had this new car. But then the defendant decided to call her friend Robert to come in. And she said that she wanted her friend Robert to test drive the car because it might be his too, and that he was going to be driving the car. And you heard what happened, that when he came to the dealership, as we all know, when you go to a dealership to test drive, they always require you to hand over your license, and he refused to do that. And Gail told you that during her interactions that afternoon with the defendant and this individual, Robert, it became pretty clear to her that she was being duped by the defendant. You also heard from Cesar Aviles, who was the sales manager at the dealership, that the defendant lied to him initially when she first came in and said that Fabio had been killed inside of the Ford F-150, and so she no longer felt comfortable driving that car, that she cried throughout their meeting, and he recalls that she called a male 3 to 4 times during the course of their meeting, and he could hear the male's voice on the other end of the phone. She wanted to return the car, but as he said, it had nothing to do with price, which was the argument the defense tried to make to you. You heard that Caesar, being the nice guy that he was, offered to buy the vehicle back. It wouldn't cost the defendant anything. She could just turn in the Ford F-150 and walk away from the dealership without getting a new car. Instead, what you heard is when she came back on that April 3rd date and spent so much time with Gail that she wound up leasing this new Mustang for $62,000. And as Caesar talked about, she purchased every available option. There was no negotiation that went on, and that she paid substantially more money. I think he said somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000 more than what it would have cost to just keep the Ford F-150. And you heard that when the defendant came home that day, there were people that were waiting for her at the house who were expecting to have a meeting with her about a tribute that they were putting on for Fabio. And when the defendant came home, she told Melanie Garibay, Carol Protat, some of Fabio's colleagues that she had given an Academy Award-winning performance at the dealership that day. She told them what a good actress she was, which is true, and that she made the salespeople feel sorry for her by playing the grieving widow, which we all knew by that point in the trial was her favorite role to play. And then we heard the defense try to make this sound less despicable than it was by making fun of it and saying, well, who doesn't love a good deal? As if somehow this is all a big joke. In reality, what this is shameful behavior. And the real question is, who would use their husband's murder to get anything? On April 8th, you saw some photographs and the description of additional photographs of the defendant out front of her new Mustang. You can see the decal from DCH Ford in the window taken by Baker as he's looking out from inside of the driver's seat of the Mustang at the defendant, who's standing out front smoking a cigarette. On that same date, the defendant posts to Instagram a happy birthday to Luigi, Fabio's son, where she pokes fun and says something about every fairy tale having a wicked stepmother, and then goes on to, again, ingratiate herself to her stepson. So again, another example of the defendant using the social media account to try and manipulate people, decent people, especially those closest to her. Then the defendant calls Detective Parshall again on April 17th. He once again asks her about the DVR installation, and once again the defendant lies to him. She says that she never had remote access. Once again, that she wasn't present when the DVR and the new system was installed with the new cameras. Again, another lie. And that Fabio told her the guys had come to do the installation while he was home and put in the new monitor. And then she also says no one had remote access to their new system, which we also know is a lie. She still hadn't replaced the DVR security system that Parshall asks her about, even though at this point we know that State Farm has paid out the money on the home insurance claim because she's painting and buying new carpeting and new curtains. Because, of course, the defendant isn't concerned with security at the house for herself or her daughters, because she knows who the real killer is. And so again, the defendant wants to celebrate Robert Baker's birthday in Las Vegas, so she reaches out again to Melanie Garibay. And Melanie Garibay once again comes through, this time with a 2-bedroom suite, because as you heard, they were going to travel to Las Vegas with Ricardo Cabrera and Sheila. And so she gets her a suite that we heard was normally $600 a night for $199. And then you saw the defendant invited Sheila and Ricardo to join them to help celebrate Baker's birthday. And here she volunteers even to pay for the entire suite herself. And you saw that she sent a picture of the penthouse suite that they were getting, and she sends the picture to Sheila. And then we know that in May, the defendant and Robert Baker flew to Las Vegas for this celebratory vacation, and Sheila and Ricardo travel separately by car and meet them there. And then, of course, the night before they leave for Las Vegas, she and Robert Baker are once again out until after 3 in the morning, again with the eldest daughter asking her where she is, and the defendant saying at 3:18 that she's almost home. The following day, on May 3rd, the defendant sends these photographs to Sheila saying Vidara Cabana time, and you can see her here with Baker and Al Birdsong in the background. And then, of course, the photographs from the birthday celebration at Marrakesh restaurant that you heard about. As you heard from Ron Ray, this was an expensive restaurant, and the defendant said, "Don't worry about it. I got money. I'll take care of it." And after this, they went to a strip club that the defendant wanted to go to, where again she ordered expensive wine, became loud and obnoxious. As you heard from Ron Ray, she was grabbing strippers by their breasts and was basically out of control, as Ron Ray described. As he also mentioned, clearly not somebody who was grieving the loss of a 20-year marriage. Then on May 5th, after dinner, we saw the defendant, along with Robert Baker and Sheila and Ricardo Cabrera, go to the Ghost Bar at the Palms Casino. And obviously, these photographs are worth 1,000 words or more, because they show a very different picture than the one that was presented for you as this grieving woman who was devastated. And obviously we know from all of the photographs that came out from various individuals that supplied them to law enforcement, when the witnesses described the defendant as extremely happy and the opposite of grief was displayed by her behavior, we saw that wasn't an exaggeration at all.